All right, so are you ready for this?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, so today we are diving into a mountain of research all about the UEFA Champions League.
Really interesting stuff.
Yeah, and it's more than just goals and trophies. We're talking about how this tournament really shapes global football, like behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah, it's incredible. The Champions League, it kind of acts like this ripple effect, right? It's not just what happens on the pitch, but it influences everything. Player contracts, team strategies, even the money involved.
And speaking of money, you don't just waltz into the Champions League. This isn't some local pub league.
No, no, no. This is the big leagues, the best of the best.
So before we even get to the research, can you break down like what makes this tournament so special, so unique?
Well, first of all, just qualifying is a feat in itself.
Oh, I bet.
You've got top teams from all the major leagues fighting for a spot. And once you're in, it's a whole different ballgame.
Okay, so walk us through it. What's it like? The structure.
All right, so you start with the group stage. Basically, it's a round-robin format. Every team in a group plays each other home and away.
Intense.
It's a real battle to survive that.
Survival of the fittest, basically. And if you make it out of the group stage, what happens then?
That's when things get really, really interesting and a lot more brutal.
How so?
It becomes a knockout stage, straight up, win or go home. And here's the thing, it's not just about who's playing well at that moment. There's a whole system. They use something called the UEFA coefficient to rank the teams.
UEFA coefficient sounds complicated.
It's actually not as complex as it sounds. Think of it like a performance tracker for clubs. It takes into account their results in European competitions over the past few years.
So past glory actually matters.
Oh, absolutely. Those wins from years ago, they can give you an edge in seeding and even help you avoid tougher opponents early on. But if a team's been struggling, well, it can come back to bite them.
High stakes, high pressure. You mentioned seeding, though. Does that change much with the new format coming?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Starting in the 2024-25 season, the Champions League is getting a little makeover. We don't have all the specifics yet, but it's going to shake things up for sure.
Ooh, inside scoop later, hopefully, but we'll see. Speaking of changes, one of the research papers you sent over, it talked about how the average age of Champions League players is going up. Which seems a little counterintuitive, right? In a sport as physically demanding as football, you'd think it would be all about the young guys.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But experience is invaluable at this level of competition. Think about it. The pressure in the Champions League is immense. The research actually shows that older players, especially goalkeepers and center backs, the guys guarding the goal, they've had years to develop that composure and tactical awareness. They don't crack as easily under pressure.
Makes sense. Those are high pressure positions. So does this aging trend, does it have anything to do with how players are valued in the market?
Absolutely. One of the studies found that player market value actually peaks between the ages of 26 and 30, particularly for those key positions. Goalkeepers and center backs are in high demand, and their experience commands top dollar.
So clubs are basically saying, give me experience over youthful exuberance when it comes to these crucial roles.
In a way, yeah. It's like they're saying, look, we're investing millions in this player, so we need someone who's not going to crumble under the pressure of the Champions League. It's a whole different game.
It's like, show me you can handle the pressure cooker before I throw you the keys to the Ferrari.
Exactly. But then that brings up another question for clubs' contracts.
Oh, how so?
Well, if a player's market value is peaking, but they're also getting up there in age, what do you do? Do you offer them a longer, more expensive contract, knowing they might be closer to retirement? Or do you risk losing them to a competitor who's willing to take that gamble? It's a high-stakes balancing act for sure.
Contract negotiations, more like high-stakes poker. But let's switch gears for a second. Let's talk about home advantage.
Huge in football.
There's no place like home, they say. And the research on home advantage in the Champions League, especially when it comes to scoring first, it was mind-blowing.
It's a real phenomenon. The stats don't lie. Scoring the first goal at home, statistically, it's like flipping a switch.
Seriously, like what kind of impact are we talking about here?
I mean, the win percentage for away teams after they concede the first goal, it plummets.
It's like trying to climb Mount Everest in flip-flops. You might make it, but the odds are stacked against you.
And it's not just about the score itself, you see. There's a psychological component at play here. The research suggests that scoring first, especially at home, it influences the entire dynamic of the game.
Okay, explain that.
All right, picture this. The home team scores, the crowd erupts, the players are buzzing with confidence, they're more likely to attack, to press their advantage, feeding off that energy from the stands. The away team, on the other hand, they're on their heels. Suddenly they're playing more defensively, trying to avoid a blowout.
It's like a momentum shift, but amplified by thousands of screaming fans. Talk about pressure.
It's a mental game as much as it is physical.
You're playing against the other team and their fans, basically.
And the weight of expectations, it's fascinating, really.
So you're telling me scoring first at home is basically a superpower?
It's a pretty big advantage, that's for sure. But speaking of advantages, we can't forget about the financial side of things. The Champions League, well, it's a money magnet.
That's an understatement. We're talking broadcasting deals, sponsorships.
Global brands lining up to be a part of it.
It's a financial windfall for these clubs, isn't it?
Absolutely. And it's not just the clubs themselves.
Right, it's the players, the cities.
The whole ecosystem benefits. One study you sent, it actually found that the Champions League has fueled this stadium construction boom.
No kidding. I've seen some of these new stadiums popping up. They're like spaceships.
Clubs see the potential. Bigger stadiums mean more tickets, more revenue. They want to make their mark on a global stage.
It's like this upward spiral. More success, more money, more investment. But is it sustainable? What about fair play?
That's the big question, isn't it? This financial gap, where some teams have way more resources than others, it creates this ripple effect. Well, clubs with Champions League money, they can poach top players from smaller leagues, which makes the competition within those leagues even more lopsided.
It's like a game of Monopoly where one person keeps buying up all the properties. Eventually, it's not fun for anyone else.
Exactly. And that ties into a big issue raised by the research, is the Champions League becoming too predictable?
I did see that in one of the studies. Is it true? Are the same teams dominating year after year?
Well, some of the research suggests there is a trend towards a smaller group of elite clubs consistently reaching the final stages.
So fewer Cinderella stories, fewer upsets. That doesn't sound good for the average fan.
And it could have long-term consequences. If people know who's going to win, they might tune out.
Right, the excitement fades.
Exactly. So how do you keep things interesting? How do you ensure a level playing field while maintaining the financial stability of the tournament?
Tough question. What are some of the ideas being floated? Salary caps. Maybe changing the way revenue is distributed.
Those are definitely some options. Redistributing the wealth more evenly could help smaller clubs compete. A salary cap could prevent clubs from simply outspending their rivals.
It would certainly shake things up.
It would require a lot of careful consideration, though. There are a lot of stakeholders involved.
It's a delicate balance, that's for sure. You have to maintain the excitement, the competition, while also ensuring the tournament's financial health.
Absolutely. But it's not just about the money.
What else then? What other factors are contributing to this potential imbalance?
Well, one thing to consider is the influx of wealthy investors into the sport. You have individuals and groups with incredibly deep pockets buying up clubs.
So it's not just the Champions League itself, it's the entire landscape of modern football that's playing a role.
Precisely.
Mm-hmm.
And this brings us to another critical question. What happens to the soul of the game amidst all this globalization and commercialization?
Right. We've talked about the financial side, the competitive balance, but there's also the cultural aspect.
Exactly. We have to remember that football clubs aren't just businesses. They're deeply ingrained in their communities, their cities, their regions. They represent a sense of identity, a shared history, a source of pride.
You can't put a price tag on that.
You can't. And this is where the Bozeman ruling, which we touched on earlier, comes into play.
Right, the ruling that changed everything. Freedom of movement for players, it revolutionized the game.
It did. It opened up a world of possibilities, but it also presented clubs with a unique challenge. How do you balance attracting the best talent from around the globe with maintaining your club's identity?
It's a tightrope walk. On one hand, you have the allure of global superstars, the excitement of a more cosmopolitan game. But on the other hand, you have the fans who yearn for the days when their team was made up of local lads who bled their club's colors.
It's about finding that sweet spot, that delicate balance between honoring your roots and embracing the future.
And it's a challenge that many clubs have grappled with over the years.
Absolutely. Think about clubs like Bayern Munich, steeped in German football tradition, or Real Madrid, a symbol of Spanish pride. They had to navigate this new era where success might mean looking beyond their borders for talent.
Did they try and fight it, hold on to their traditions?
There were definitely growing pains. Some clubs resisted the changes, clinging to their homegrown players. Others dove headfirst into the global market, signing big-name players from all over the world.
And how did that work out for them?
Well, it was a mixed bag. Some clubs found success with a more global approach, while others struggled to integrate new players into their systems and cultures. It was a learning curve for everyone.
A learning curve that continues to this day, I imagine. But that's what makes the Champions League so fascinating. It's a microcosm of these larger forces shaping the world: globalization, commercialization, the tension between tradition and progress.
It's a constant evolution.
It really makes you think, doesn't it,
It does.
about the bigger picture?
Yeah, it's not just about what happens on the pitch, is it? It's a reflection of what's happening in the world around us.
And it's kind of like this tug of war, right? Between, like you said, globalization, commercialization, but then this desire to hold on to tradition.
It's a balancing act, for sure. You see it everywhere, not just in football. Look at music, for instance. You've got these megastars selling out stadiums worldwide, and then you've got local bands struggling to get noticed.
It's that tension between the global and the local, right? It's like, how do we make sure we're not losing something special, something unique in this pursuit of, I don't know, bigness?
Exactly. And it's a question that the Champions League, and really any global entity, has to grapple with.
So as we kind of wrap things up here, what are your thoughts? Can the Champions League find that balance? Can it be this global spectacle while still preserving the heart and soul of the game?
I think it has to.
You think so?
I mean, if it wants to remain relevant, if it wants to keep fans engaged, it needs to find a way to make the game more inclusive, more equitable.
Which brings us back to your earlier question about leveling the playing field. What can be done? I mean, we tossed around some ideas, salary caps, revenue sharing, but are those realistic?
They're definitely starting points for a conversation.
Right, because we want those underdog stories.
Absolutely. Those are the stories that capture the imagination. When a team with limited resources, a team that nobody expects to win, when they defy the odds, it's inspiring.
And it reminds us that anything is possible.
Exactly. So, to our listeners out there, we turn it over to you. What are your thoughts? How can we make the Champions League even more exciting, more competitive, while still preserving its financial stability? It's a tough question.
It is, but it's a conversation worth having.
It is.
Because it's not just about football, is it? It's about finding ways to create a more level playing field in all aspects of life.
And ensuring that everyone has a chance to shine.
Well said. So, that's it for today's deep dive into the world of the UEFA Champions League. We've covered a lot of ground, from the financial implications to the cultural impact and, of course, the future of the beautiful game.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
Likewise, and a huge thank you to our listeners for joining us on this journey. Remember, it's not just about who lifts the trophy at the end of the season, but the stories, the rivalries, the moments of brilliance, and the passion that make this sport so captivating. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the love of the game alive.
Cheers to that.